To get us kicked off here, we have Cal Haefke from the Ohio State University, presenting on the influence of kinematic movement patterns during a baseball swing on ball speed. Cal?
Hello, everyone. My name is Cal Haefke. I'm going to be a fourth-year undergrad student at Ohio State University studying biomedical engineering. I'm going to share with you guys today a research project that I completed this past school year alongside my mentors, Dr. Jimmy Onati and Dr. Maria Tallarico. So I want to give a shout out to them for all the help they've given me with this project over the past year. So we know as hitters, one of the main objectives of the swing is to hit the ball as hard as we can to maximize ball exit velocity. When we break down the swing, we can analyze it in a similar way to a pitch in terms of the kinematic sequence in a kinetic chain. So in a swing, the energy is initiated from the ground up when we put our legs into the ground and initiate a ground reaction force. And that force is then carried up through the chain and out through the bat into the ball, resulting in ball velocity and ball flight. So many studies have been done on the kinematics of the baseball swing, but not as many have been completed on the kinetics of the baseball swing. So this kind of inspired me to start this project, and that the purpose of this project was to examine the relationship between kinetic parameters, so ground reaction forces of a batter's swing, and ball metrics. So the methods of the study is we had 45 male baseball players, 43 high school, 1 professional, and 1 college. And we had them hit 5 baseballs off a tee and 5 baseballs off of a front toss while standing on 2 Bertec force plates. Ground reaction force metric and data was then analyzed using MATLAB, which I'll explain more here in figure 1. And we used a Rapsodo to monitor ball speed. Linear effects models were fit with ball speed as the outcome variable, and fixed effects were the peak force, normalized body weight, impulse, and rate of force development. So those were the 3 kinetic metrics that we analyzed for this study. And these analyses were done in RStudio. So when we look at figure 1 here, this is a typical vertical force profile that you would see when you plot vertical force given by the force plate. So there is a initiation, a little counter movement. That's when the force drops to 200 to 300 newtons, and then an immediate drive up to about 1200 newtons, and this is the peak force. So for a relative frame of mind, ball contact usually occurs right after peak force. So the way we got these metrics was we output the peak force in the swing and made that the peak force, or the maximum force in the swing, and we called that the peak force. We calculated the slope of this yellow highlighted line, and that is rate of force development. And then we integrated the curve above body weight and under the force curve to get the impulse, which is the area under that curve. And the impulse is the force multiplied by the time that force is applied for above body weight. Our results, we found significant relationships between vertical rate of force development and ball speed for hits off of a front toss, a significant relationship between vertical impulse and ball speed for hits off of a tee, and a significant relationship between horizontal rate of force development and ball speed for hits off of a front toss. And so these numbers are summarized in the table up at the top right, but for the, so this table is relative, it was coded relative to a 10,000 unit change. So for example, for our 3 metrics that came back as significant, for every 10,000 Newton per second increase in vertical rate of force development, there was a 1.5 mile per hour increase in exit velocity for hits off of a front toss. For every 100,000 Newton seconds increase in vertical impulse, there's a 7 mile per hour increase in exit velocity for hits off of a tee. And then for every 10,000 Newton per second increase in horizontal rate of force development, there's a 5.7 mile per hour increase in exit velocity for hits off of a front toss. So, and then there was no relationship between peak force and ball speed for either hits off of a tee or a front toss. So in conclusion, what we can gain from this is that rate of force development and vertical impulse corresponded to an increase in ball speed. So these findings suggest and reveal that kinetic factors do contribute to ball speed depending on the type of hit. So this was an interesting finding, like the dependent on type of hit. And my hypothesis is that this may be due to a different approach that was taken when hitting a ball off a tee versus hit off of a front toss. For example, some batters may not have taken a stride and may have taken a more simple swing when the ball was on the tee, resulting in a longer hold on that force and a larger impulse. So that could be why that impulse was a significant metric in just hits off of a tee. Whereas on the other hand, hits off of a front toss, maybe they took a big stride and then immediately went at the ball, lunging into the ground, and the force was then developed at a higher rate, and that could be the resulting, or like the reason behind rate of force development being significant for hits off front toss. And this could mimic a game-like situation more realistically when the ball is coming at them in the air and they have to make a decision on whether to swing or not. So in summary of all of this, from this study, we conclude that kinetic metrics are significant and can be used to help maximize ball speed. But when we look at the finding that there was no relationship between peak force and ball speed, this tells us that it's not important just to put force into the ground as much as you can. It is necessary to be able to control that force up through the kinetic chain with proper kinematic sequencing in order to maximize ball speed. And so I think that's about 5 minutes. So I'm going to wrap it up there. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your time.
Awesome. Thanks, Cal. Really appreciate that. Next presenter we'll have is Dr. Arnel Aguinaldo, who's an assistant professor at Point Loma Nazarene, and he will be introducing his student, Avery Avina, who will be presenting the effects of pelvic rotation, trunk rotation, and ground reaction forces on bat speed in collegiate baseball hitters. Arnel?
Hey guys, I'm Dr. Arnel Aguinaldo from Point Loma Nazarene University, and I've got the privilege of introducing our presenter, one of my honor student, Avery Avina. She was selected to do an honors project for her senior year. She is now a graduate of a bachelor's in science and kinesiology, and she'll be starting the MS program this fall, and has been interested in doing baseball-related research, specifically looking at hitting. Up until this point, we mainly concentrated on the biomechanics of pitching. So now this research initiative is really looking at the kinematics, kinetics, and the energetics associated with baseball hitting. So without further ado, I'll just hand off the reins to Avery here. Avery?
Thank you, Dr. A. So yeah, I had the privilege of working underneath him this past year. This is actually in the left, a video of one of his studies that was just recently done, looking at how energy flow is related to elbow valgus torque, one of the greater risk factors of pitching. And this kind of just pushed me into understanding more about the kinetic chain and how that influences the baseball swing, because it is also a rotational movement pattern. So I did a deep dive into a literature review and found lots of studies done to understand more of the mechanics of the baseball swing, specifically Escamilla and Dr. Fleisig's study looking at the phasing of the swing and the age level differences, which was really interesting to see the kinematic pieces. But I was trying to create a more rounded understanding of the swing itself. And so even deeper looking at ground reaction forces, finding another study by Fortenbaugh and Dr. Fleissig, looking at the different pitch types and how those affect ground reaction forces. But that was specifically just ground reaction force, which was so cool to understand, but trying to put those two ideas together and create, again, like a more rounded understanding of the baseball swing together. So from here, we chose 3 factors that were hypothesized to be able to predict bat speed itself, bat speed being the performance indicator of the swing. Beginning with ground reaction force, first of all, because it is the initiator of the kinetic chain, as proven through the other research that I just mentioned. Also the X factor, which was widely researched through baseball pitching, also the badminton forehand smash, tennis forehand smash, things like that, even in golf, other rotational movement patterns. So the X factor, which is the angle between peak hip unloading and peak upper trunk loading, so that twist angle. And then we also looked at pelvic velocity, because it is a piece of the X factor itself. So from there, we took all those factors and had 10 collegiate baseball players from our university's team come and swing in the lab for us. We used a 39 bat track marker, passive marker set, 7 of those going on the bat itself. And then in our lab, we have 8 3D motion capture cameras around the lab, as you can see in those 2 bottom pictures, at 240 hertz. And then we also have 2 force plates in the floor. You can see them in the ground that he's standing on, the ANTI 1200 hertz force plates. And then there's a blast motion, if you can see it on the end of his bat on the knob. And then we had them hitting in the lab because we were just looking at the swing itself. We weren't looking at pitch influences, so we got to just do it in the lab. So if you can see, this video up here is just our collected data. It was pre-COVID, so it was all I had. I couldn't get back into the lab. Just straight out of Cortex, So yeah, and then we put those factors through a multiple factor linear regression analysis. There were the 6 factors with the ground reaction force in the X, Y, and Z directions of both the lead and the stance leg. And then that was impulse and ground reaction force as well. And then we had the pelvic velocity, the trunk velocity, stance width, stance length, and the X factor as well. So those were all put through the regression analysis, where we found that in the key findings, 97% of the variance in bat speed can be explained by bat angular speed, stride length, and X factor. Bat speed makes sense that it would predict bat angular speed makes sense that it would predict bat speed. The stride length was surprising. It wasn't hypothesized, but it makes sense because it was a piece of the ground reaction force. And when we had our 10 guys come into the lab, they're pretty big guys. I wasn't expecting them to not be able to keep their stride within the 2 force plates that we have. And we obviously didn't want them to shorten their stride, so we just had to work with it. But I think that this could have popped up because we did have a small sample size. There was only 10 guys, so this would have to be more widely researched to get a better understanding of it. Also, the X factor was a predictor of the bat speed, which was what was hypothesized. So it was really cool to see that come through as a predictor of the bat speed. And then further, within the regression analysis, we found that the anterior impulse on the back leg was the only significant predictor of the pelvis angular velocity. And this also was interesting looking at the impulse, which is the change in momentum of that back leg. You can see it's twisted in this picture right here. So as this batter would change the velocity of that back leg, it has a prediction on the pelvis angular velocity, which is super cool. So what does this mean for us moving forward? It just points to further research for us because this was just a pilot study. There's only 10 guys that were able to come in. Again, understanding the impact of the stride length on the bat speed. A lot of what's out there right now is just opinion-based. There's a lot of, oh, if your stride length is too long, then your center of mass is lower and you can't swing your hips as much as you should be able to. So there definitely needs to be greater understanding of what this looks like. And then pinpointing connect chain muscle activation from anterior stance leg impulse to pelvic rotation. So seeing what muscles actually light up within that movement pattern, moving from the ground reaction force up into the pelvic rotation. So that is all I have. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Avery. And we'll bring Cal back as well now for some questions. This was directed at Cal, but I think it applies for both Cal and Avery. So maybe Cal, you can start with this question first. Did either of you happen to look at timing of the force plate data with respect to certain phases like foot contact or ball contact?
I did not. I know that there is a lot that can be looked into with all of this force plate data that we acquired in this study. So that would be very interesting to go back and look at whether the peak force is occurring a certain amount of time before ball contact or not. So that is a great question that we did not look at. Just from experience and working on this project throughout the year, I know that ball contact typically occurred directly after peak force, but depending on the hitter, that could be different and something interesting to look into.
Avery, how about on your end?
We did make the timelines. When we were in Cortex, we used ball contact and the toe contact as the timeline. So we also could go back and look. I think looking at the stride length was a piece of it, but there's definitely, like Cal said, a lot more to look into to understand that further, even with understanding the rotation of the hips and the stride length as well.
For sure, absolutely. Avery, this question is directed for you. I assume your output of bat speed is bat linear speed. Was the speed in the X direction or in 3D space? What point on the bat was used to correspond to bat speed?
Yeah, so we used the blast motion sensor to understand the bat speed. We didn't use the 3D one. But yeah, it was the blast that goes on the knob, which was really exciting because each player had one of those for himself to bring in.
Any reason on why using blast instead of the marker data of the bat that you had?
Yeah, the marker data of the bat speed was like a lot faster than, I think that's what has to do with the 3D. So it doesn't translate as well to the rest of our data. So we did use the blast for that.
Okay. Got it. Cal, this one's for you. It looks like you normalized your forces, but not the rate of force development and impulse. First, is that correct? And if so, why didn't you divide the rate of force development and impulse by body weight?
Yeah, that is correct. Initially, we did divide everything by body weight, but then looking back at everything and kind of thinking about it, body weight, or excuse me, peak force is dependent on body weight. For example, a heavier athlete could put 2,000 newtons into the ground versus a lighter athlete who could put 1,000 newtons into the ground, and that is not, and just so dividing that by body weight makes that relative and an even playing field. And so the decision to not normalize rate of force development was we felt that rate of force development was just the slope of the line, and that had nothing to do with body weight. So we felt that a lighter athlete could create a slope and a rate of force development equal regardless of body weight. So we decided to take body weight out of that picture and not normalize that. And then for impulse, we did not divide that by body weight because the impulse was the integral of the curve above the body weight. So the body weight was being incorporated into that metric as the bottom bound of the integral. So there was no need to then further divide it by body weight, as we wanted to just know how long they were holding that force above their own body weight, so that would neutralize body weight across the whole, all subjects.
Sure. Okay. Thanks. And we'll do one last question here, and this one's for Avery. Can you explain your breakdown of the 97% variance in bat speed among the bat angular speed, stride length, and X factor? Was it similar among the three? How was that dispersed? And additionally, what was the range of bat speeds that you guys collected on?
Trying to look at that question. Dr. A, do you have?
Yeah, I could chime in on that. I believe bat angular speed was definitely the, I guess, the strongest of the predictors, which obviously makes sense, and then that followed by stride length. And surprisingly, even though the regression found that X factor was a predictor, it was actually, of the three, a minimal effect. I'm blanking on the actual standardized coefficient, but I do know that it was the least among the three. But those three, linear combination of those three independent variables was, I believe, made up 97% of the variance that explains, in this case, bat speed.
Awesome. Well, sounds good. Well, thank you, Cal, Avery, and Dr. Aguinaldo. I really appreciate it. And we'll move on to our next session here.